Welcome to Celtic Tomes, bringing you readings from bygone books.
Welcome to Celtic Tomes, readings by Gary and Ruth from the classic books of Celtic lore and study. Book 3, Chapter 5 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions by Wirt Sikes.
Book 3, Chapter 5, Courtship and Marriage, including planting weeds and rue on the graves of old bachelors, special significance of flowers in connection with virginity, the Welsh Venus, bundling or courting Abed, kissing schools, Rhamanta, lovers' superstitions, the maid's trick, dreaming on a mutton bone, wheat and shovel, garters in a lover's knot, eggshell cake, sowing leeks, and Twca and Sheath. Section 1. Welsh courtship is a thoroughgoing business, early entered upon by the boys and girls of the Principality, and consequently most Welsh women marry young. The ancient laws of Howell the Good, died in 1948, expressly provided that a woman should be considered marriageable from 14 upwards, and should be entitled to maintenance from that age until the end of her 40th year. That is to say, from 14 to 40 she ought to be considered in her youth. By every sort of moral suasion, it is deemed right in Wales to encourage matrimony, and nowhere are old bachelors viewed with less forbearance. There used to be a custom, I know not whether it be extinct now, of expressing the popular disapprobation for celibacy by planting on the graves of old bachelors that ill-scented plant, the rue, and sometimes thistles, nettles, henbane, and other unlovely weeds. The practice was even extended most illiberally and unjustly to the graves of old maids, who certainly needed no such insult added to their injury. Probably the custom was never very general, but grew out of similar, but other meaning, customs which are still prevalent and which are very beautiful. I refer to the planting of graves with significant flowers in token of the virtues of the dead. Thus, where the red rose is planted on a grave, its tenant is indicated as having been in life a person of peculiar benevolence of character. The flower specially planted on the grave of a young virgin is the white rose. There is also an old custom at the funeral of a young unmarried person of strewing the way to the grave with evergreens and sweet-scented flowers, and the common saying in connection therewith is that the dead one is going to his or her marriage bed. Sad extremely, and touchingly beautiful are these customs. But wherever such exist, there are sure to be ill-conditioned persons who will vent spiteful feelings by similar means. Hence the occasional affront to the remains of antiquated single folk, who had been perhaps of a temperament which rendered them unpopular. The Welsh, being generally of an affectionate disposition, courtship, as I have said, is a thoroughgoing business. To any but a people of the strongest moral and religious tendencies, some of their customs would prove dangerous in the extreme. But no people so link love and religion. More of their courting is done while going home from church than at any other time whatever, and the Welsh Venus is a holy saint, and not at all a wicked pagan character like her classic prototype. Holy Dwynwen, Goddess of Love, daughter of Brachan, had a church dedicated to her in Anglesey in 590, and for ages her shrine was resorted to by despoiling swains and lovesick maidens. Her name, Dwyn, to carry off, and Wen, white, signifies the bearer off of the palm of fairness, and ruling the court of love while living, and when dead, 1,000 bleeding hearts her power invoked. Throughout the poetry of the Cymric bards, you constantly see the severest moral precepts and the purest pictures of virtuous felicity, mingling in singularly perfect fusion with the most amorous strains. Among the choice things of Geraint, the famous blue bard, were "The song of ardent love for the lip of a fair maid, a softly sweet glance of the eye, and love without wantonness, a secluded walking place to caress one that is fair and slender, to reside by the margin of a brook in a tranquil dell of dry soil, a house, small and warm, fronting the bright sunshine." With these versifications of all the virtues and moralities. "In the whole range of Cymric poetry," says the learned Thomas Stevens, "there is not, I venture to assert, a line of impiety." Section 2. The Welsh custom of bundling, or courting Abed, needs no description. The Welsh words sopen and siwpio mean a bundle and to bundle, and they mean a squeezed-up mass and to squeeze together. But there is a further meaning, equivalent to our word baggage, as applied to a strumpet. The Reverend Dr. Thomas, late president of Pontypool College, whose acquaintance with Welsh customs is very extensive, and to whose erudition I have been frequently indebted during my progress on these pages through the press, tells me he never heard the word sopen or siwpo synonymous with bundling used for the old custom, but only cari yn y gwely, courting a bed. The custom of bundling is still practised in certain rural neighbourhoods of Wales. To discuss its moral character is not my province in these pages, but I may properly record the fact that its practice is not confined to the irreligious classes. It is also pertinent here to recall the circumstance that among these people anciently, courtship was guarded by the sternest laws, so that any other issue to courtship than marriage was practically impossible. If a maiden forgot her duty to herself, her parents, and her training, when the evil insult became known, she was to be thrown over a precipice. The young man who had abused the parents' confidence was also to be destroyed. Murder itself was punished less severely. Customs of promiscuous sleeping arose in the earliest times, out of the necessities of existence in those primitive days, when a whole household lay down together on a common bed of rushes strewn on the floor of the room. In cold weather, they lay close together for greater warmth, with their usual clothing on. Caesar's misconception that the ancient Britons were polyandrous polygamists evidently had here its source. It is only by breathing the very atmosphere of an existence whose primitive influences we may thus ourselves feel that we can get a just conception of the underlying forces which govern a custom like this. Of course, it is sternly condemned by every advanced moralist, even in the neighbourhoods where it prevails. An instance came to my knowledge but a short time ago, in 1877, where the vicar of a certain parish, Murdrim, Carmarthenshire, exercised himself with great zeal to secure its abolition. Unfortunately, in this instance, the good man was not content with abolishing bundling. He wanted to abolish more innocent forms of courting. And worst of all, he turned his ethical batteries chiefly upon the lads and lasses of the dissenting congregation. Of course, it was not the vicar's fault that the bundlers were among the meeting-house worshippers and not among the established churchgoers, but nevertheless it injured the impartiality of his championship in the estimation of the Methodists. I am not sure the bundling might not have ceased, in deference of his opinions notwithstanding, if he had not in the excess of his zeal complained of the young men for seeing the girls home after meeting, and casually stretching the walk beyond what was necessary. Such intermeddling as this taxed the patience of the courting community to its extreme limit, and it assumed a rebellious front. The vicar, quite undaunted, pursued the war with vigour. He smote the enemy hip and thigh. He returned to the charge with the assertion that these young people had schools for the art of kissing, a metaphorical expression, I suppose, and that they indulged in flirtation. Oh, this was really too much. Bundling might or might not be an exclusively dissenting practice, but the most unreasonable of vicars must know that kissing and flirtation were as universal as the parish itself. And so there was scoffing and flouting of the vicar, and as rebounds are proverbially extreme, I fear there is now more bundling in Mudrim than ever. Section 3. The customs of Rhamanta, or romantic divination, by which lovers and sweethearts seek to pierce the future, are many and curious in all parts of Wales. Besides such familiar forms of this widely popular practice as sleeping on a bit of wedding cake, etc., several unique examples may be mentioned. One, known as the Maid's trick, is thus performed, and none must attempt it but true maids, or they will get themselves into trouble with the fairies. On Christmas Eve, or on one of the 3 spirit nights, after the old folks are abed, the curious maiden puts a good stock of coal on the fire, lays a clean cloth on the table, and spreads thereon such store of eatables and drinkables as her larder will afford. Toasted cheese is considered an appropriate luxury for this occasion. Having prepared the feast, the maiden then takes off all her clothing, piece by piece, standing before the fire the while, and her last and closest garment she washes in a pail of clear spring water on the hearth and spreads it to dry across a chair back turned to the fire. She then goes off to bed and listens for her future husband, whose apparition is confidently expected to come and eat the supper. In case she hears him, she is allowed to peep into the room, should there be a convenient crack or keyhole for that purpose, and it is said that there be unhappy maids who have believed themselves doomed to marry a monster from having seen through the cranny the horrible spectacle of a black-furred creature with fiery eyes, its tail lashing its sides, its whiskers dripping gravy, and gorging itself on the supper. But if her lover come, she will be his bride that same year. In Pembrokeshire, a shoulder of mutton with 9 holes bored in the blade bone is put under the pillow to dream on. At the same time, the shoes of the experimenting damsel are placed at the foot of the bed in the shape of a letter T, and an incantation is said over them, in which it is trusted by the damsel that she may see her lover in his everyday clothes. In Glamorganshire, a form of Rhamanta still exists which is common in many lands, a shovel being placed against the fire. On it a boy and a girl put each a grain of wheat, side by side. Presently these edge towards each other. They bob and curtsy, or seem to as they hop about. They swell and grow, and finally pop off the shovel. If both grains go off together, it is a sign the young pair will jump together into matrimony. But if they take different directions, or go off at different times, the omen is unhappy. In Glamorganshire also this is done. A man gets possession of a girl's garters and weaves them into a true lover's knot, saying over them some words of hope and love in Welsh. This he puts under his shirt, next his heart, till he goes to bed, when he places it under the bolster. If the test be successful, the vision of his future wife appears to him in the night. Section 4. A curious Rhamanta among farm women is thus described by a learned Welsh writer. The maiden would get hold of a pullet's first egg, cut it through the middle, fill one half shell with wheaten flour and the other with salt, and make a cake out of the egg, the flour and the salt. One half of this she would eat. The other half was put in the foot of her left stocking under her pillow that night. and after offering up a suitable prayer, she would go to sleep. What with her romantic thoughts, and her thirst after eating this salty cake, it was not perhaps surprising that the future husband should be seen, in a vision of the night, to come to the bedside bearing a vessel of water or other beverage for the thirsty maid. Another custom was to go into the garden at midnight, in the season when black seed was sown, and sow leeks with 2 garden rakes. One rake was left on the ground, while the young woman working away with the other, humming to herself the while, "I sawl see the good video, doidi good gribinio." Or in English, "He that would a life partner be, let him also rake with me." There was a certain young Welsh woman who about 80 years ago performed this Rhamanta, when who should come into the garden but her master. The lass ran to the house in great fright, and asked her mistress, "Why have you sent master out into the garden to me?" "Well, well," replied the good dame in much heaviness of heart. "Make much of my little children." The mistress died shortly after, and the husband, eventually, married the servant. The sterner sex have a form of Rhamanta in which the knife plays a part, and this is to enter the churchyard at midnight, carrying a Twca, which is a sort of knife made out of an old razor with a handle of sheep or goat horn, and encircle the church edifice 7 times, holding the Twca at arm's length and saying, "Dower Twca, play my wine. Here's the Twca. Where's the sheath?"
That was Book 3, Chapter 5 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions by Wirt Sikes. A link to the full text can be found in the show notes at celtictomes.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. You can also find all of the names, place names, and other non-English words written down for you in the show notes in the order in which they appear in this reading. If you'd like to comment on this chapter, pop over to our show notes and join in or start a conversation. If you've enjoyed this podcast, why not try our sister podcast, the Celtic Myth Pod Show, which brings the stories of ancient Celts to life with narrative and drama, as well as bringing you modern Celtic music, stories and information. Find the Celtic Myth Pod Show in all the places where the best podcasts hang out, or on our website at celticmythpodshow.com. You've been listening to Celtic Tomes, read by Gary and Ruth. Our theme music is Gander in the Pretty Hole by Slauncher, and a link to their music can be found in the show notes at celtictomes.libsyn.com. This podcast has been produced by The Celtic Myth Show.